Russia is mourning the victims of the deadly blaze in the Siberian city of Kemerovo. 64 people, including many children, lost their lives in a huge fire that broke out at a shopping and entertainment complex on Sunday. President Putin, who's in the city, says criminal negligence was to blame for the blaze. Well, anger is running high in the city, where people have gathered at the headquarters of the regional government. They are demanding answers and justice for the victims. More people are expected to rally today, and the crowd has been repeatedly chanting a word: truth. The region has declared 3 days of mourning. President Putin laid flowers at a makeshift memorial at the shopping centre. He also visited the injured in a local hospital and promised that all those responsible would face punishment.
When you hear for the first time how many people died, that children died, you don't just want to cry, you want to scream. But after you hear what's happening here, frankly, you feel very different.
Okay, for more on the situation in Kemerovo, I'm joined by Murat Gazdiev. Murat, crowds, as we're seeing, they're increasingly coming out onto the streets in despair, in anger. We'll perhaps get that to a moment more in detail, but just on the president, he's been meeting local officials as well. What's come out of that?
Well, he was very direct, using very strong language, saying that, what led to this is criminal negligence and carelessness on behalf of officials. He said that the actions of every single official involved in this horrific tragedy will be evaluated, that those responsible will be punished. This is the promise that he made. He also took a dig at corruption, saying, if you give money, they'll give you any sort of permit without checking anything. Heads will roll here, but the pictures now on air are the protest live in Kemerovo. These people are upset, they're anguished, they're incredibly sad, and they're angry. They're angry with authorities. They're demanding the truth. They're saying that the reaction from authorities, from the fire service, was inadequate. They're very angry that, the conditions under which so many people died were allowed to happen, to take hold, because of authorities, because of officials, because of their negligence, because they did not control things, because they gave out permits where they were undeserved, and they did not check that this shopping center was safe to be in. They're now demanding answers from two representatives, the city mayor and the governor, I believe.
Сколько говорят. Слушайте дальше. То есть после того, минуточку внимания, мы после этого мы заехали на посмотрели там,
Yeah, so that's just what we're seeing at the moment, as Murat was saying. Local officials coming out, trying really to answer some of the many questions that the public are raising here. Murat, you're talking about the president. Really, corruption was one of his key election themes. It's going to be first and foremost here as well, isn't it? The people here that died. Let's not of course forget how many children died in this. 64 people. We don't know the final figures of children here at the moment, but you can understand that is why so much an outpouring of anger, of frustration, of sadness is on these streets right now.
Well, look at it this way. The brief that Putin was given, we learned a few tidbits that we had heard about before that have now been confirmed. The fire itself began in the playroom, the arcade room in the shopping center, on the 4th floor. It was caused either by malfunctioning electronics, a short circuit, perhaps bad wiring, or it was a fire that was set on purpose, an open fire, so somebody might have taken a lighter to something, though that is less likely, say investigators. This is early days yet, but they're looking into what caused this. So we expect more details. But the moment the fire took hold, everything went south. Everything went wrong. The fire alarm had been malfunctioning and had been offline for more than a week, since the 19th.
That's extraordinary. For a full week, 7 days, that there was no functioning fire alarm in that region.
Exactly, and nobody fixed it. But they had a backup system that, you had to press a button. Security had to press a button, and there'd be an alarm that would sound around the building. Nobody pressed it. Nobody pressed this button. There was no warning. The only warning people had that something was wrong is when they had a column of smoke, dense, thick smoke, come towards them. And this smoke, in a fire like this, it travels incredibly quickly, incredibly fast. You have to run to outpace it, which is why people were breaking windows, opening doors, anything to get the smoke out. But the other problem was the doors were locked. The doors in the cinema itself, in the screen rooms, they were locked. Apparently locked by the people who were supposed to be watching them, by management, so that those without tickets couldn't get in after showing after the films start. And this is incredible, because usually you have someone sitting at the door waiting for the duration of the movie for it to be over, so nobody goes in, or that isn't supposed to be in there. In this case, the fire began, the doors are locked, and all the people inside, predominantly children, are stuck. They couldn't get out, and they're calling their fathers, their mothers, saying, "We're stuck in here, we're suffocating, please help." And you have parents who left their children, who left them in the cinema, in the arcade room, in the playroom, and went about the shopping center, about their business, shopping or whatever it is.
You do see that, don't you? You see kids that are left perhaps with an elder sibling. You go with your younger children to the cinema, the parents do the shopping, especially on that day, a Sunday afternoon, which would have been very busy, a lot of other people around. So you're saying that the other parents, they just weren't there. They were on the lower floors. This cinema was on the higher, the 4th floor, I believe. And that is another aspect of it. It made it much more difficult to get to them.
Well, it's exactly it. One father, he left his 3 daughters, 5 to 11 years old, in the cinema. He went downstairs to the 1st floor, he's doing whatever he was doing, gets a phone call from one of his daughters saying, "I'm trapped. We're suffocating, there's a fire." By the time he got to the 4th floor, it was too late. It was full of smoke. He tried to use a wet cloth and forge in, but he couldn't do it. He had to go back, and his daughter kept on calling him. Imagine how horrific that must have been. So you can understand why these people in Kemerovo are so upset, why they're so enraged, so angry, why they're demanding the truth and accountability. 5 people have been arrested so far. They expect more arrests. For 64 people that have died, 6 still missing. But earlier on, I put together a report about the loss that these people have taken, about why they're so angry, why Kemerovo is a city on the edge. And I must warn viewers that they may find some of this distressing.
I ran upstairs. Cinema staff didn't let me through. They pushed me. My daughter asked me why no one was saving her. I asked the firemen to do something, but they just stared at me.
I ran to the 3rd floor. Firemen stood there doing nothing in front of the door. My daughter told me that she loved me and that she was suffocating. I told her to get down on the floor and begged her not to die.
The children are dear. It isn't a matter of how many are dead now. Unless we change something, hundreds of others could die.
No matter how long we stand here, no matter how loud we shout, no one will hear us.
Yeah, Murat, just as we will get, of course, to your piece in just a moment, we wanted to show just pictures of what we have been seeing all morning long there in Kemerovo. One of the people who was speaking there, I believe, was a father, and can you imagine this? 3 of his children died. Like, you can just imagine what is coming out of him, how he's thinking over the past 3 days since this occurred. A lot of people surrounding him, really trying to give him support, but also wanting to hear what he has to say and what other people in his predicament are feeling today. So much anger out there as well. But we want to hear your report. I saw it earlier. You really give such a great description of the children, of the parents, of the school children who are going on a day out from the countryside to the city, looking forward to it for such a long time, I would imagine, and their day, their parents' day, ending in utter catastrophe. Can we now just have a look at Murat's piece, please?
For rural youngsters, a visit to the big city is always an adventure. These 12-year-old classmates went to town, and they went bowling, ice skating, to the cinema. It would be their last adventure.
Целый класс был, 11 лет ребятишкам, весь класс был в кинотеатре. Она позвонила по телефону, идет дым, мы никого найти не можем, двери закрыты, и все.
Dozens and dozens dead, but they aren't just numbers. They all had names, lives. All the compensation in the world won't cover their family's loss, especially given that so many of the victims were children. Masha was there with her grandmother. She only turned 10 last week and posted this photo online. Exactly a decade is all she got in this world. Both she and her grandmother perished. Tatiana, an English teacher, she was there with her daughter who survived. Tatiana got her out of the building before hearing that others were still trapped. She went to help rescue who she could, strangers, but she never came back out. You were the best teacher in the world, write her former students. You didn't deserve this. We will all remember you.
4-й этаж, где кинотеатр полностью затемнен, полностью в дыму, все горит, народ весь в панике, дети плачут, страшно.
Little Ratibor pictured here with his mum and dad. She wasn't with them, but imagine her pain when she had to identify the bodies of her child and husband. Not even surviving is easy. Some say he jumped. Others that his father threw him out of the window in a desperate effort to save his little boy before succumbing to the smoke himself. We won't know until Sergei wakes up from his coma, alone, his parents and little sister. There are too many to mention here, but the point is made. A list of names is one thing, but it's only when you get to know them, just a little, that the depth of this tragedy really hits you.
Yeah, really evocative piece, just giving an example of some of the people touched in that tragedy. Murat Gazdiyev is with me in the studio. We have been going back and forth to live pictures from Kemerovo where people are out in force, people are angry, people are sad, people want answers to what is going on, why so many people died in that blaze. Murat, we've been listening to speakers, those touched directly by the tragedy, a father of three children who perished in this disaster, speaking as well. Also, you were saying earlier, officials from the region.
Yeah, well, this father's story is particularly touching because, as I said, he left his 3 daughters, a 5-year-old and 2 11-year-olds, in a cinema to watch a cartoon. He went downstairs for whatever reason to shop or to go about his business, and he gets a call from one of his daughters who was distressed, saying that there was smoke all over the place, that they were trapped, the doors were locked and they couldn't get out. By the time he got to the 4th floor, it was full of smoke. There was no getting in. He says he smashed a window, but that didn't help. Somebody gave him a wet rag to put in his face. He tried to go in through the smoke with that rag, but he couldn't do it. He tried to get low, but he couldn't get past the smoke. So he ran downstairs, he ran outside. He found firemen who had just arrived and who were preparing to go in. He says he screamed at them, he begged them to hurry up, but they spent, he says, 3 minutes just putting their masks on, just putting their casks on. By the time that they were equipped, that they were ready, he was, on the edge, he was hurrying them up. They got upstairs, and somebody diverted them. He says security, I believe, or somebody else, they told them to head somewhere else, and they went somewhere else. So he was left there after everything that had happened with nothing. He couldn't go in, the firemen had gone somewhere else, and his daughter kept calling him. Throughout this time, his daughter kept calling him, begging her father to come help her, to come rescue her. And
chanting a word, truth. The region has declared 3 days of mourning. President Putin laid flowers at a makeshift memorial at the shopping centre. He also visited the injured in a local hospital and promised that all those responsible would face punishment.
When you hear for the first time how many people died, that children died.
They're anguished, they're incredibly sad, and they're angry. They're angry with authorities. They're demanding the truth. They're saying that the reaction from authorities, from the fire service, was inadequate. They're very angry that, the conditions under which so many people died were allowed to happen, to take hold. Because of authorities, because of officials, because of their negligence, because they did not control things, because they gave out permits where they were undeserved, and they did not check that this shopping centre was safe. Negligence and carelessness on behalf of officials. He said that the actions of every single official involved in this horrific tragedy will be evaluated, that those responsible will be punished. This is the promise that he made. He also took a dig at corruption, saying, if you give money, they'll give you any sort of permit without checking anything. Heads will roll here, but the pictures now on air are the protest live in Kemerovo. These people
You don't just want to cry, you want to scream. But after you hear what's happening here, frankly, you feel very different.
Okay, for more on this situation in Kemerovo, I'm joined by Murat Gazdiev. Murat, crowds, as we're seeing, they're increasingly coming out onto the streets in despair, in anger. We'll perhaps get that to a moment more in detail, but just on the president, he's been meeting local officials as well. What's come out of that?
Well, he was very direct, using very strong language, saying that, what led to this is criminal negligence.
Russia is mourning the victims of the deadly blaze in the Siberian city of Kemerovo. 64 people, including many children, lost their lives in a huge fire that broke out at a shopping and entertainment complex on Sunday. President Putin, who's in the city, says criminal negligence was to blame for the blaze. Well, anger is running high in the city, where people have gathered at the headquarters of the regional government. They are demanding answers and justice for the victims. More people are expected to rally today, and the crowd has been repeatedly